The celebration had been going on for 3 days. The Great Hall of the Vreth Dominion Central War Station was filled. With noise and light, soldiers cheered. Officers drank. Holographic displays showed the same image over and over. Planet cracking apart its surface, burning, its oceans turning to steam. The Selen Republic had been the 130th civilization to fall before the Vreth fleet. It had taken less than 2 weeks to break them. In the end, the Selen people had begged. They had sent their leaders in small ships to surrender personally, kneeling before warlord after warlord, hoping for mercy. They had not received it. High Sovereign Vrethnal stood at the top of the hall and watched his people celebrate. He was tall by Vreth standards, with gray-green scaled skin and 4 arms that moved with slow, deliberate grace. His eyes were pale gold, the mark of the ruling bloodline, and they looked down at the celebration with the flat, satisfied expression of someone watching something they had already predicted down to the last detail. 130 victories, not one defeat. Not one single moment where another civilization had made the Vreth Dominion feel anything other than absolute supremacy. An aide approached him and bowed low. The aide was young, nervous, and held a data tablet with slightly shaking hands. Vrethnal did not look at him immediately. He made the young aide wait for a moment, as was custom, before extending one of his lower arms and taking the tablet. The report was labeled Sector 7 Delta, Primitive. Designation Earth. Vrethnal scrolled through it slowly. Earth, a single planet in an unremarkable star system on the outer edge of a quiet galaxy arm. 1 star, several planets. The intelligent species called themselves humans. They were soft-bodied, 2-limbed, fragile things with a short lifespan and an extraordinary tendency to fight each other. For most of Vreth history, Earth had been marked as a pre-contact civilization, too primitive to bother with, too disorganized to be a threat. Several scout probes had been sent over the decades. Most had returned with boring data. Humans had wars among themselves. They argued about politics. They built cities and then damaged them. They were, in the words of the last survey, a chaotic species with no meaningful capacity for galactic conflict. Then 6 months ago, one of the scout probes had not come back. Vreth now tapped on that section of the report. The probe had entered the outer region of Earth's star system, past the large ringed planet, past the gas giants, and had simply stopped transmitting. No explosion recorded, no debris located. It had just gone silent. His analyst had several theories. Equipment failure was most likely. Perhaps the probe had malfunctioned. Perhaps it had drifted into the gravitational field of one of the outer planets. These things happen sometimes, even with Vreth technology. But one analyst, a careful, cautious individual named Voskra, had filed a secondary report. Voskra had noted that the probe's final transmission contained a fragment of unusual energy data. The fragment was small and incomplete, but it matched in rough terms the signature of a targeted energy weapon. In other words, something might have shot it down. Vrethnal had read Voskra's report. When it first came in, he had not found it interesting. Earth had primitive weapons, kinetic launchers, chemical propellants, possibly, if the humans had been clever over the last few decades. Some basic directed energy tools. None of it was capable of threatening a Vreth scout probe. Voskra was being overly Cautious, the probe had malfunctioned. He handed the tablet back to the aide. Prepare the Eternal Dominion for departure, Vreth now said. His voice was calm and low and carried the particular tone of someone who had never in his life needed to raise it. Send Warlord Zarvok to Earth, one ship. Aide blinked. One ship, High Sovereign. For a planet with the report says they have no defensive fleet, that is exactly why one ship is enough, Vreth now said. He turned away from the celebration below and walked toward the long window that looked out into space. Sending a fleet to Earth would imply that Earth deserves a fleet. It does not one ship. Zarvok will deliver the standard surrender terms. If they comply, we absorb the planet and its resources. If they do not comply, he will burn their largest population centers until they change their minds. The aide nodded quickly and left. Vreth now stood at the window for a moment. Longer 130 victories. The number sat comfortably in his chest like a warm stone. No civilization in the known galaxy had resisted the Vreth dominion. For longer than a month, most fell in days. The ones that tried to fight lasted a little longer, but the result was always the same. Earth would be no different. It would be number 131. 42 light years away in a small office on the third floor of a building that looked from the outside like nothing more than a government records facility. Admiral Kale Park was staring at a data screen and drinking his fourth cup of coffee. The coffee was cold. He had forgotten about it again. Park was in his late 50s with a lean face and short gray hair that had gone from black to its current color in a span of about 4 years, during which time he had been responsible for the single most stressful project in the history of human civilization. He did not look like a man who commanded the most powerful secret military force Earth had ever built. He looked like someone who worked too many hours and forgot to eat lunch. But his eyes were sharp, and right now those eyes were reading the same intelligence report 3 times. The report had come from a deep space monitoring array, one of 12 that Earth had quietly placed at the outer edges of the solar system over the past 2 decades, disguised as astronomical observation platforms. Each array was sensitive enough to detect the gravitational wake of a ship traveling at high warp speed. They had been designed for exactly this moment. Vreth warship had crossed the edge of the monitoring perimeter 4 hours ago. Its identification profile matched the Eternal Dominion, one of the Vreth Dominion's heavy conquest vessels, ship that had participated in 47 confirmed planetary subjugations. Its drive signature indicated it was moving at steady approach speed, not full combat velocity. It was not hiding. It was not rushing. It was strolling. Park set down his cold coffee and pressed a button on his desk. Get me Ji-on and Min Jun. Tell them to be in the briefing room in 20 minutes and tell them to bring everything. He stood up and walked to the window of his office. Outside, the city moved. Normally, people went about their mornings. Children went to school. Somewhere a few streets over, someone was playing music too loudly. Life was entirely ordinary. Park looked at the sky. It was a clear day, blue and wide and calm. He could see a faint white streak where a commercial aircraft had passed. He could see a satellite, or what looked like a satellite, catching the morning light as it moved slowly across the upper atmosphere. He knew what that object actually was. It was Not a satellite, it was the outermost layer of a weapons platform that had been operational for 11 years and that the public had never been told about. There were 37 similar objects in various orbits. There was a reason Earth had never responded publicly to the existence of alien civilizations, even after 6 decades of confirmed contact data. There was a reason the deep space monitoring arrays had been built under the classification of long-range weather prediction infrastructure. There was a reason the unified Earth Defense Fleet had trained in the dark side of the moon for the past 18 years, running exercises that never appeared in any public record. Earth had known this day was coming. Earth had been preparing. Park turned away from the window, picked up his jacket and walked toward the briefing room. 20 minutes later, the three of them sat around a table covered in holographic maps and data streams. Dr. Jian Cho was already there when Park arrived, and she looked like she had not slept, but her eyes were focused and her expression was steady. She was in her early 40s with quick hands and the particular kind of calm that came not from the absence of fear, but from a lifetime of deciding that fear was not useful. She was the person who had spent 23 years taking apart pieces of alien technology and turning them into something better. General Minjun Lee arrived 30 seconds after Park. He was a large man with a quiet way of moving that always seemed slightly wrong for his size. He had commanded Earth's orbital fortress network for 9 years. He sat down, folded his hands on the table, and looked at the Admiral without speaking. Park pulled up the ship data on the main holographic display. The Eternal Dominion appeared as a blinking point of light moving slowly through the outer solar system. They sent one ship, Park said. Min Jun looked at the display. One ship, they think that's enough, Jayon said. She did not sound offended. She sounded like she was filing the information away. By every metric they have available to them, it probably should be, Park said. He zoomed out the display to show the full solar system. They've absorbed 130 civilizations. Some of those civilizations had actual fleets, standing armies, organized planetary defenses, and none of them stopped a single Vreth conquest vessel. He paused. They're not wrong to think one ship is enough. From everything they know, it is. From everything they know. Minjun repeated quietly with a faint trace of something that was not quite a smile. Park looked at him. How long until the fortress network is fully active? 6 hours, Minjun said. Everything was already on standby. We just need to complete the power-up sequence and run final calibrations. Park nodded. He turned to Jayon. Xenotech arsenal, ready, she said. Simply has been ready for 2 years. I just need authorization to move it from storage to active configuration. Park gave it to her with a nod. Jayon pulled up a secondary display and began running through a checklist. Park watched her for a moment. He had seen her work for over 2 decades. He had watched her sit in labs for 16-hour stretches, taking apart pieces of alien equipment that had no documentation and no instruction and no context, and slowly, carefully figuring out how they worked and then figuring out how to make them work better. The Vreth Dominion had spent centuries building their military technology. Jian Cho had spent 23 years reverse engineering it, improving it, and building Earth's own version of it. with the kind of stubborn focus that, in Park's view, was the most human thing he had ever witnessed. He looked back at the display. The Eternal Dominion was still moving, still strolling. They'll broadcast a surrender demand when they get close enough, Park said. Standard Vreth protocol. They'll give a deadline, probably between 8 and 24 hours. They'll expect panic or silence or negotiation. They won't get any of those things. Minjun said. No, Park agreed. They won't. He looked at the blinking point of light on the display for a moment. Longer. One ship. The Vreth Dominion had sent one ship, and they had done it the way someone flicks away a small annoyance without looking, without caring, already thinking about something else. Park thought about the 60 years of work that had gone into this moment, the hidden factories, the training programs, the ships built in the shadow of the moon, the weapon systems that had never been fired in actual combat, the thousands of people who had worked in silence under classification so deep their own families did not know what they did, all of them building toward a moment that most of them quietly hoped would never come, but prepared for as though it absolutely would. He picked up his cold coffee from where he had carried it in, looked at it, and set it down again. Get me Commander Song, he said. Tell her to bring the unyielding to alert status. Tell her it's time. Outside, the sky was still blue, still calm, still ordinary. It would not be ordinary for very much longer. The Eternal Dominion crossed the orbit of the outermost planet at exactly 3:47 hours Earth Standard Time. Its sensors swept the solar system ahead and found nothing of concern. No fleet, no fortifications, no energy signatures worth noting, just a quiet system with one inhabited planet sitting peacefully in the middle of it. Warlord Zarvak stood on his command bridge and looked at the planet on the main screen. It was blue and white and green, and it looked soft the way all inhabited planets look soft from a distance. He had seen this view 147 times in his career. A new planet, a new civilization, the same result every time. He told his communications officer to prepare the surrender broadcast. He did not tell him to prepare the weapon systems. That could wait. He expected this to be over by morning. The broadcast came at 6:12 hours. It interrupted every signal on Earth, every television channel, every radio station, every open network frequency, every public communication system on every continent. It did not ask permission. It simply arrived, cutting through everything else the way a blade cuts through paper, and suddenly there was a face on every screen and a voice in every speaker that had never been seen or heard on Earth before. Warlord Zarvak looked out from those screens with pale flat eyes and scales, the color of old iron. He was not trying to seem frightening. He did not need to try. He spoke in Vreth in a translation system that the Dominion had loaded from Earth's own public broadcast signals, gathered over decades by their probe network, rendered his words in English, and then in Chinese, and then in 17 other languages simultaneously. The translations layered over each other. A low murmur beneath the primary channel. His message was short. He said that the Vreth Dominion had claimed this solar system as part of its territory. He said that the civilization of Earth had 12 hours to signal unconditional surrender. He said that any act of resistance would be met with immediate destruction of population centers, beginning with the largest cities. he said that civilizations which surrendered peacefully were absorbed into the Dominion as a labor class and were permitted to continue existing in a diminished form. He said that civilizations which did not surrender were simply removed. He did not say, please. He did not say he was sorry. He did not express any particular emotion about it at all. He said it the way someone reads a list of instructions, evenly calmly, already thinking about what comes next. Then the broadcast ended and every screen on Earth returned to whatever it had been showing before. And for a moment, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Then everything happened at once. In cities across every continent, people poured into the streets. Some were afraid, some were angry, some stood very still and simply looked up at the sky as though they expected to see something there. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Within minutes, governments began issuing statements. Within the hour, every major news network broke away from its regular programming and replaced it with anchors who were visibly trying to stay calm while the words coming out of their mouths described the single most extraordinary event in human history. World leaders called each other, scientists called each other, generals called each other. The United Earth Council was an emergency session. Within 90 minutes, the council chamber was located beneath the surface in Geneva in a facility that officially did not exist. 31 representatives sat at a curved table, each of them connected to advisors on secondary screens, and they talked over each other for the first 40 minutes with a particular kind of noise that fills a room when everyone is afraid, but no one wants to be the first one to show it. Admiral Cale Park waited. He sat at the far end of the table and waited while the noise went on. He had a folder in front of him. He had not opened it. He did not need to. He knew everything in it by memory. He waited with the patience of someone who had been preparing for this meeting for a long time and understood that the people around him needed a few minutes to catch up. Eventually, the representative from the North American Council turned to him. Admiral Park, she said, and the room quieted slightly. You've seen the broadcast. What is your assessment? Park looked down the table at 31 faces. My assessment, he said, is that they sent one ship. The room was quiet. One ship, he said again, not a fleet, not a task force, one vessel. They did this because they believe one ship is sufficient to conquer this planet. They believe this because every other civilization they have ever encountered has, at this point in the process, already begun sending surrender signals. He paused. They are about to discover that we are not every other civilization. Someone toward the middle of the table, the representative from East Asia, a thin man with glasses and a look of deep concentration, said quietly, "Are you telling us we can fight them?" "I am telling you," Park said, "that we have been preparing to fight them for 60 years. I am telling you that the fleet is ready, the fortress network is ready, and the weapon systems are ready. I am telling you that we have reverse engineered and improved upon their own technology and built defenses that they have never seen and cannot currently predict." He let that sit for a moment. "I am telling you that 12 hours from now, when their deadline expires, we will not be sending a surrender signal. We will be ready." The room was very quiet. The representative from South America said, "And if we lose?" Park looked at her. Then we lose, he said simply, but I do not believe we will, and I believe that if we surrender now, we lose everything regardless, not in battle, but permanently. The Vreth Dominion does not free its labor class, it does not release conquered civilizations. Surrender means permanent subjugation. That is not a risk worth avoiding by giving up. He looked around the table. I am not asking for a vote on whether to fight. I am telling you that the decision was made together 22 years ago when this council authorized the construction of the defense fleet. We built it for this reason. Today is that reason. Another long silence. Then the representative from East Asia took off his glasses, cleaned them, put them back on, and said, "What do you need from us?" Park stood up. "Keep the broadcast running. Keep people informed. Tell them we are responding. Tell them we are ready. Do not tell them to hide, because hiding implies we expect to lose, and we do not." He picked up the folder he had not opened. "I need to get back to my command." He walked out of the chamber, and behind him the council began to talk again, but quieter this time and more purposefully, the way people talk when they have accepted what is coming and are moving past fear into focus. Dr. Giant Show was in the deepest level of Facility 7, standing in a chamber the size of a sports stadium, surrounded by equipment that no outside observer had ever seen and no public record had ever described. The Xenotech arsenal was not a single weapon, it was a collection of systems, some of them defensive, some of them so precisely specialized that they had been built to counter exactly one type of Vreth technology. Giant had spent 23 years building this collection. She had started with fragments. Pieces of probe equipment had been recovered after the scout devices malfunctioned or were discreetly brought down. She had taken those fragments to her lab and spent months on each one, studying the energy principles behind them, tracing the engineering logic, testing and failing and testing again. The first thing she had built from Vreth technology was a shield, a small one, barely large enough to protect a single vehicle, based on the energy deflection field she had found in a probe's collision protection layer. It had taken her 4 years to make it work. It had taken another 3 to scale it up to ship size. It had taken another 6 to improve it to the point where it could absorb impacts that the original Vreth design could not. That was how she worked. She did not just copy what she found. She found it, understood it, and then asked the question, what would make this better? The Vreth Dominion had never asked that question about their own technology. They had conquered enough civilizations on their existing specifications that they had never needed to. Their weapons worked, their shields worked, their ships worked. Why chain what worked? Jiayong had learned that the answer to that question was because someone else might change it for you, and they might change it in ways that you are not ready for. She moved through the chamber now, checking systems, watching readouts, giving quiet instructions to a team of technicians who had been working alongside her for years and who moved through the space with the focused efficiency of people who had run this activation sequence drills more times than they could count. The arsenal hummed to life around her. Piece by piece, energy cells charged, targeting arrays aligned, communication links to the fleet and the fortress. Network confirmed. Each confirmation light that came on in the chamber was another 60-year-old promise being kept. Her comm channel opened Admiral Parks. Voice came through. Jayong status. Full operational in 4 hours, she said. Ahead of schedule, good, Park said. Zarvok's deadline is in 6, then we'll be ready with 2 hours to spare. How's the disintegration array, Jayong? Paused for a moment. The disintegration array was the last thing she had built. The project that had taken the longest and cost the most, and that she had debated the ethics of more than anything else in her career. It was not a weapon she was proud of exactly. It was a weapon she had built because she understood that there might come a moment when nothing else was enough. It's ready, she said. I hope we don't need it, so do I, Park said. Channel closed. General Minjun Lee stood on the command deck of Orbital Fortress Station 1 and watched his network come online. The stations were not beautiful things. They were functional and gray and heavily armored, built for purpose. Rather than appearance, they had been disguised for years as communication relay platforms, and they did genuinely relay communications, which made the disguise easier to maintain. But beneath the relay equipment, beneath the signal towers and the antenna arrays, each station was a weapons platform capable of delivering concentrated energy fire, launching guided kinetic projectiles, deploying drone swarms, and projecting localized interference fields that could disrupt incoming targeting systems. 24 of them placed in a network across Earth's orbital space that created interlocking fields of fire, meaning that any vessel approaching Earth would be caught within the range of multiple stations simultaneously and could not position itself to engage only one. The Vreth Dominion had no intelligence on these stations. They had been built quietly, maintained quietly, operated under cover for over a decade. Minjan watched the power readouts climb across his display, station by station. The network came fully online. Green confirmations, all systems operational. He turned to the officer beside him. Get me a channel to the unyielding. The channel opened, and Commander Haeyun Song's voice came through. She was 38, composed and steady, and she had commanded the ESV unyielding for 3 years. She had run more simulated battle scenarios against Vreth ship profiles than any other commander in the fleet. She knew the Eternal Dominion's specifications the way she knew her own. Ship General, she said. Commander Song, your status? Ready, she said. Simply, the fleet, 17 other ships, all confirmed operational, all holding position behind the moon as planned. Brief pause. We've been watching the Eternal Dominion's approach. It's moving slowly, no combat configuration yet. They haven't even powered their weapons to full charge. Minjan smiled. Slightly confident, extremely. Song said, I've read their engagement history, every planet they've approached. Since the 80th conquest, the civilization surrendered before the deadline expired. They haven't fought a serious battle in a long time. Another pause. That's going to work against them. Yes, Minjun said. It is. The 12 hours passed. No surrender signal came from Earth. Zarvok waited past the deadline by 20 minutes as protocol allowed. He sat in his command chair on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and watched the communications display, waiting for the inevitable last-minute signal that always came, the panic transmission from whatever passed for a planetary government begging for terms, offering resources, promising compliance. It did not come. His Communications officer turned from his station. No signal, Warlord. The deadline has passed by 22 minutes. Zarvok looked at the blue and white planet on his main screen. It sat there, peacefully, its surface partially covered in cloud, its lights visible on the dark side, the lights of cities full of the small, soft creatures who apparently did not understand what was about to happen to them. He was not angry, he did not feel contempt. Exactly, he felt the mild, distant puzzlement of someone whose expectation has been slightly, inexplicably disappointed. Weapon systems, he said to his crew, target the largest population center on the northern landmass, prepare a full-yield energy strike. Weapons charging, Warlord. The Eternal Dominion's main weapon array began to power up. The hum of it ran through the ship's superstructure like a heartbeat, getting louder. Zarvok had heard that sound 147 times. It always ended the same way. Fire, he said. The energy blast left the Eternal Dominion in a column of white-blue light that cut through space at a speed no human eye could track. On the bridge, Zarvok watched the targeting display and waited for the confirmation that the strike had landed. He waited. The confirmation did not come. His weapons officer said very carefully, Warlord, the strike was intercepted. Zarvok turned his head slowly toward the display on the tactical screen where the energy column should have struck the planet's surface and created the signature explosion that marked the beginning of every conquest. There was instead a different image entirely. Something in low orbit had moved. Something had come between the shot and the planet. Something had taken the full-yield energy strike directly and was still there. Zarvok stared at the screen. What, he said, is that? And from the planet below, before his weapons officer could answer, 24 things that had looked like communication towers turned and looked directly at him. The first thing that told Zarvok something was wrong was the silence after a full-yield strike from the Eternal Dominion. There was never silence. There was always the sound of his crew confirming the impact. There was always the image on the tactical screen of a city going dark, a surface crack beginning, the pressure wave spreading outward from the strike point. There was always the next step, the second strike, or the communication from the planet's leadership offering surrender, or both. There was none of that now. There was only the tactical screen showing that the energy column had hit something, and that something had held. Zarvok was on his feet before he realized he had stood. He crossed the bridge in 4 long strides and stood directly in front of the main tactical display, staring at the data with his pale gold eyes working through what he was seeing. The object that had intercepted the shot was an orbital platform. Structurally, it looked like a communications array, hexagonal, ringed with what appeared to be signal equipment, moving in a standard orbit. But it had moved. It had moved fast, rotating on its axis and presenting a flat face to the incoming shot, and the flat face had simply taken the hit and held. Zarvok had hit planets with full-yield strikes. He had hit warships with full-yield strikes. He had hit orbital defenses with full-yield strikes. He had never, in 147 engagements, hit anything that simply absorbed the energy and kept floating. Analysis, he said to ship mind Kravis. Kravis spoke from the bridge's central speaker in the cool, precise tone it always used. The platform employed an energy absorption field. The technology appears to be derived from Vreth deflection architecture, but the conversion rate is significantly higher. The platform absorbed approximately 92% of the strike's total energy output. The remaining 8% was dispersed as heat. Radiation. A brief pause. I would like to note that standard Vreth deflection fields operate at a maximum conversion rate of 61%. Zarvok stared at the screen. They improved it, he said. That is the most accurate interpretation, yes. Kravis said. Zarvok's turned to look at the rest of the orbital space around Earth. His sensors were working through the data now, and what they were finding was rearranging his understanding of the situation faster than he liked. The 24 platforms he had originally scanned them as communication infrastructure were not communication infrastructure. They were weapon stations. He could see them rotating into firing position now. All 24 of them, their angles shifting in a coordinated pattern that indicated shared targeting network. How long have those been there? He said, based on the construction, material density, and the settling patterns in their orbital paths, I estimate 8 to 12 years, Kravis said. They were disguised effectively. My earlier scan did not identify them as weapons platforms. Zarvok's absorbed. This 12 years, the humans had been hiding weapons platforms in plain sight. For 12 years, and the Vreth dominions, probes and surveys, had never identified them. He filed that thought away. Weapons, he said, full charge all. Arrays target the platforms, take them down before the platforms fired. They did not fire one at a time. They fired in a coordinated burst that the targeting network of 24 stations produced simultaneously. Each shot calculated to arrive at the eternal dominion from a slightly different angle, at a slightly different moment, timed so that no two impacts would hit the same shield facing at the same time, and allow the ship's deflection system to reset between hits. Zarvok felt his ship shudder. The breath deflection field held. It was built for warship combat and was significantly more powerful than anything the Dominion expected to find at Earth, but the shots kept coming. The platforms were cycling their fire at a rate that was notably fast for the size of the energy discharge involved, and the angles kept shifting, always finding a new part of the eternal Dominion's defensive surface to press against. Deflection field at 87%, his weapons officer said. Return fire. Zarvok said. All arrays concentrate on the closest platforms first. The Eternal Dominion opened up with everything it had. The warship was massive, nearly 4 km long, armed with 16 primary energy arrays and 48 secondary batteries, and it produced a volume of fire that had, in previous engagements, reduced orbital installations to scattered metal in under 2 minutes. The platforms took the hits. Their shields absorbed some shots, others got through and left visible scorch marks on the station hulls. 2 of the 24 stations went dark, their shield systems overwhelmed, their equipment destroyed. Zarvok watched those 2 go down with a small surge of satisfaction. Then 22 continued firing, and 2 replacement platforms, he had not seen them on his earlier scan, emerged from behind the planet's upper atmosphere and took their positions. There are more of them, his sensor officer said, with a note in his voice that Zarvok did not like. How many more? I am still completing the Count, the sensor officer said, but there are significantly more. Zarvok's walked back to his command chair and sat down carefully. He brought up the tactical display on his personal screen and looked at what his sensors were now revealing as they continued their expanded scan. The platforms were one layer behind the platforms. In slightly higher orbits there were smaller defensive objects, mines he realized, disguised as space debris, positioned in clusters that would funnel an approaching vessel into kill zones. And in the upper atmosphere itself, moving below the platform network, there were what appeared to be surface-launched defense drones, deploying in large numbers, rising spiral formations that were designed to create overlapping engagement envelopes. It was a layered defensive network. Each layer was designed to work with the others, strip away the platforms, and you ran into the mine clusters, push through the mines, and you entered the drone zones. And all of it was firing at him with weapons that outperformed what they should, based on everything the Dominion knew about human technology, be capable of. Kravis, he said quietly, Warlord, these weapon systems, what is their technology base? A pause. This pause was slightly longer than Kravis' usual response time, which meant the ship mind was working through something complicated. The energy signatures across multiple systems indicate breadth, technological foundations. The targeting architecture appears derived from breadth, sensor design. The shield technology, as previously noted, is an improvement on breadth deflection fields. The projectile weapons show characteristics consistent with breadth kinetic array technology. Another pause. However, in every case, the human implementations show modifications and improvements that do not match breadth standard specifications. They have taken our technology and changed it. Zarvok was quiet for a moment. He thought about the probe that had gone missing 6 months ago. He thought about the analyst who had filed the secondary report suggesting the probe might have been shot down. He thought about how he had dismissed that report and how High Sovereign Vrethnal had dismissed it, and how everyone in the Dominion had looked at Earth and seen a primitive civilization with no meaningful capacity for galactic conflict. He thought about 60 years of scout probes sent to this system. Some of them had come back, some had not. The ones that had not come back, he had a feeling he now knew what had happened to them. Deflection field at 74%, his weapons officer said. The platforms continued firing. The drones were rising now into weapons range, and they were small and fast and numerous, hundreds of them in a cloud formation, each one individually manageable but collectively a nightmare for a targeting system that was designed to handle large threats, not small fast swarms. Target the drones, Zarvok said. Secondary batteries, wide dispersal. His secondary batteries opened up, and they were good at what they did. The dispersal fire tore through the drone cloud and destroyed dozens of them in the first exchange, but for every drone destroyed, 2 more launched from the surface. They came up continuously, replacing their losses faster than the Eternal Dominion could eliminate them, and the platforms never stopped firing. Zarvok had fought battles before. He had fought battles against civilizations that had actual military fleets. He had fought battles against planets that had planetary shields and orbital cannons and surface-to-space missile systems. He had always won those battles, and he had won Them because the Vreth Dominions technology was the best in the known galaxy, and because his opponents were always in the end improvising, throwing whatever they had at the problem and hoping it was enough. These humans were not improvising, they had a plan, a specific layered interlocking plan that had clearly been designed to fight exactly this kind of ship. Every layer of their defense connected to every other layer, the platforms covered the angles the drones could not reach. The drones filled the gaps in the platforms, firing arcs, the mine clusters guided the Eternal Dominion away from the positions that would have given it the best firing angles. It was not the desperate response of a civilization scrambling to defend itself. It was a trap, a 60-year trap, deflection field at 68%. His weapons officer said, and there was something different in the officer's voice now. The steadiness that Vreth officers maintained in combat was beginning to carry a thin note of something that was not steadiness. Zarvok opened a channel to his engineering deck. I need the deflection field reinforced. Pull power from secondary life support and non-essential systems. Yes, Warlord, the engineer said, reinforcing, but Warlord, the pattern of incoming fire is targeting our reinforcement zones. Every time we strengthen a section of the field, the fire concentrates on an adjacent section. They are tracking our reinforcement patterns. Zarvok stared at his screen. They were reading his ship's defensive responses and targeting accordingly. Kravis, he said, I see it. The ship mind said, they have detailed knowledge of our deflection field mechanics. They know how the system prioritizes reinforcement. They are exploiting the reinforcement cycle. They had the probe data. Of course they did. Every probe the Dominion had ever sent to this system, the ones that came back and the ones that did not, had carried standard Vreth technology, standard shielding, standard drive systems, standard sensors. If a human scientist had access to those probes, had spent years studying how Vreth technology worked at its core, had understood the reinforcement cycle of a Vreth deflection field, they had turned his own technology into a map of his weaknesses. Zarvok pushed the thought aside. The Eternal Dominion was still a warship. It was still far larger and more powerful than anything it was currently fighting. 68% deflection capacity was not a crisis. He had fought battles at 20% and still won. Push forward, he said. Move toward the planet. Get inside the platform network. Close quarters. Use our size advantage. His helmsman began the maneuver. The Eternal Dominion moved forward, its drives pushing against the engagement envelope, trying to get beneath the angle of the platform. So fire. Zarvok watched the screen and planned his next move. What he did not see, what his sensors had not yet detected, because they were positioned on the far side of the moon and running their drives at minimum power output, specifically to stay below sensor threshold, were 18 ships. They were waiting. They had been waiting for hours. They were waiting for him to move forward. In the command center on Earth, Admiral Park watched the tactical display as the Eternal Dominion began its push. He had been standing at this display for 4 hours, watching the defensive layers work, tracking the ship's responses, noting every adjustment Zarvok made and how long it took him to make it. He turned to Min Jan, who stood beside him. He's moving in, as predicted, Min Jan said, "Tell Commander Song," Park said, "that it's time to come around." Min Jan opened the channel. "Commander Song," the admiral gives the order, "bring the fleet." Around the moon, there was a brief pause, and then Song's voice came through, calm and clear. "Understood. Fleet is moving." Park looked at the display. The Eternal Dominion was still firing, still pushing forward, still in some deep-set part of its warlords, thinking, believing that it was in a difficult battle, that it would eventually win, because it had always eventually won. Park thought about the 60 years of work behind this moment. He thought about everyone who had built this and trained for this and waited for this. He thought about the 130 civilizations that had not had 60 years to prepare. He watched the display and waited for Commander Song's fleet to appear on his sensors. They appeared 30 seconds later, 18 ships coming around the edge of the moon in a clean formation, drives at full power, every weapon system charged and targeted, emerging into open space like a fist unclenching. Zarvok's sensor officer would be screaming right now. Park almost felt something like sympathy, almost. The sensor officer did not scream. He was trained better than that, but the way he said the words, clipped and tight and stripped of the professional steadiness that Vreth officers spent years perfecting, told Zarvok everything he needed to know before he even looked at the display. Warlord, 18 contacts emerging from behind the planetary satellite drive. Signatures indicate warship class. They are a half-second pause. They are moving to intercept. Zarvok looked at his display. 18 ships. They were not large ships by Vreth standards. Each one was roughly 1/5 the size of the Eternal Dominion, but they were moving in tight formation with a precision that indicated not just training but deep familiarity with each other's movement patterns. They were positioned in 3 staggered rows of 6, and the formation was designed to ensure that no matter which direction the Eternal Dominion turned, at least 2 rows of ships would maintain an unobstructed angle of fire. They had planned this formation specifically for a ship of his size. He had not thought about that until right now, and the thought settled in his chest with a weight he had not felt in a very long time. "Identify them," he said. His sensor officer ran the scan. "Hull configurations do not match any recorded vessel type in Dominion. Intelligence records. Drive technology is consistent with modified Vreth. Propulsion systems, weapon signatures indicate energy arrays of an unknown class." The officer paused again. "They have not appeared in any of our probe data. They were built in secret, then built somewhere the probes never found." He thought about the dark side of the moon, a convenient hiding place that he had never thought to scan specifically, because the moon was barren and uninhabited and not worth the sensor time. The fleet opened fire. It hit the Eternal Dominion from 18 different points almost simultaneously. The shots were coordinated in the same layered, cycling pattern as the orbital platforms, each hit arriving at a slightly different angle on a slightly different section of his deflection field, never giving the system time to fully reset. The platforms were still firing from behind him. The drones were still swarming his secondary batteries, and now 18 warships were adding their fire to the pattern. From the front, the Eternal Dominion shuddered hard enough that Zarvok grabbed the arm of his command chair. Deflection field at 51%, his weapons officer said, and the steadiness in his voice was gone entirely now. Multiple arrays taking heavy fire, sections 4 and 7 reporting localized field collapse. Hull integrity holding. Zarvak pulled up his tactical overview and made himself look at it clearly. He was surrounded. The platforms behind him, the fleet ahead of him, the drone clouds filling the intermediate space, the mine clusters limiting his maneuvering option. He was a large, powerful ship with extraordinary firepower, and he was in the middle of a carefully constructed cage that had been built. He understood this now completely and without room for comfortable denial, specifically to hold exactly the kind of ship he commanded. He thought about the 130 civilizations that had come before. He thought about how simple those conquests had been. He thought about the planets that had surrendered before the deadline. He thought about the ones that had fought back with their own ships, usually a handful of small, poorly coordinated vessels that his weapons crews had dispatched with the professional ease of people performing a routine task. He thought about how the Vreth Dominion had looked at Earth and seen the same thing they had always seen: a primitive world, a soft target, a number to add to the list. He thought about how 60 years of preparation looked from the outside exactly like a primitive world doing nothing. Return fire, he said. All primary arrays focus on the lead ship. The Eternal Dominion's remaining primary arrays swung toward the approaching fleet and fired. The volume of fire was still enormous, even with sections 4 and 7 degraded. The warship's primary armament was a weapon system that had reduced orbital defenses to vapor in previous battles. The energy columns hit the lead ship's shield and the ship lurched sideways, taking damage. Zarvak watched the readout and saw that he had heard it had collapsed. Its shield on one facing and done real structural damage to the hull, but the lead ship did not stop. It absorbed the hit, corrected its trajectory, and kept coming. On the bridge of the ESV, unyielding, Commander Haeun's song gripped the edge of her command console and did not sit down. The hit had been hard. 3 decks on the port side had compressed. 2 of her secondary battery stations were offline. Her shield readout showed a sharp dip on the port facing that her engineers were already working to compensate. Her damage control officer was reporting casualties, 3 crew members injured. Non-critical. Hold formation, she said to her helmsman. Continue approach vector. Commander, the port shield is at 32%, her weapons officer said. No, she said, keep moving. She had run this engagement in simulation over 300 times, not specifically this engagement. She had not known when or exactly how the Vreth would come, but engagements of this type against a ship of this class and this size, she knew. The Eternal Dominion's weapon cycling time, she knew that it took the primary arrays 47 seconds to run a full recharge cycle after a maximum output burst. She knew that 47 seconds was enough time for her to close the gap between her current position and the position she needed. All ships maintain your firing pattern, she said on the fleet channel. Don't let them reset their field. Keep the cycle going. 15 of the 17 other ships confirmed. 2 were repositioning after taking significant hits in the first exchange. They would be back in firing position within a minute. Song watched the range counter on her display. The Eternal Dominion was large, enough that even at this distance she could see it on the direct optical feed. A massive shape against the stars, still firing, still fighting. Vreth ships did not break easily. She had known that. From the data, the crew of that ship were soldiers and they would not stop until they had to. She respected that in the way that one soldier sometimes respects an enemy's commitment, even the middle of trying to stop them. Range to primary target, she said. 800 km and closing. Her navigation officer said, prepare the flank strike. Package, she said, the flank strike. Package was something she had developed, specifically from the study of wrath. Deflection field architecture. A simultaneous multi-angle burst from multiple ships that hit a single target, from angles that the field's reinforcement algorithm was mathematically incapable of simultaneously defending. It required precise positioning and precise timing. It required every ship in the strike group to be exactly where it needed to be at exactly the right moment. She had practiced it 312 times. All ships in strike group confirmed positions, she said. 6 ships confirmed their positions were perfect. Fire, she said. 6 ships fired simultaneously at 6 different angles on the Eternal Dominion's hull, each shot hitting a point that the deflection field's reinforcement system could not cover without leaving a different point open. The combined effect was immediate and visible. Sections of the hull on the warship's right side went dark as the field collapsed under the impact. Cascade metal vaporized. Something structural failed. One of the Eternal Dominion's aft primary arrays went silent. Song watched the readout. Again, she said, same pattern, rotate 30 degrees. The strike group fired again. Zarvox felt the second hit before his instruments reported it. The Eternal Dominion shook with a violence that was different from the sustained battering of the previous exchange. This was not accumulated fire wearing down his defenses. This was a precision strike that had found the geometry of his deflection field and folded it. He had never experienced that before. He had never experienced a situation in which an enemy force clearly understood his defensive architecture well enough to attack it geometrically. Deflection field at 33%, his weapons officer said, his voice stripped of everything now. Primary arrays 2, 5, and 8 are offline. Hull breach confirmed in sections 14 through 18. We have explosive decompression on deck 7, 8, and 9. Zarvox sat very still in his chair and looked at his tactical display. His situation was clear. He was at 33% defensive capacity. He had lost 3 primary arrays. He was taking fire from multiple directions simultaneously with no room to maneuver that would chain the engagement geometry. The 18 human ships were closing to short range, at which his size advantage became less relevant because at close range the smaller ships could fire into whole sections that were not fully covered by the weakening deflection field. He needed to withdraw, or he needed reinforcements. Open long range communications, he said. Priority signal to High Sovereign Breath now. Report our status. Request immediate warlord. The communications officer's voice was flat. Long-range communications array is offline. It was destroyed in the last exchange. Zarvox looked at the communication station. It had not been a random hit. He ran back through his memory of the strike impacts and found One specific shot from one specific angle that had hit exactly the position where his long-range array was mounted. Not the short-range array, not the sensors, the long-range array. Specifically, they had targeted it. Deliberately, he thought about how they would have known where the long-range array was positioned on a breath warship. He thought about probe data again. He thought about a human scientist with 20, 30, 40 years of study material. He thought about how you would know exactly where to shoot if you wanted to prevent a ship from calling for help. He felt something cold moving through him that he recognized after a moment as the first real fear he had felt in years. Short-range communications, he said. Operational, the officer said. Then, broadcast on all frequencies, Zarvox said to the human fleet. Tell them he stopped. He looked at the tactical display. He looked at the readouts. He looked at the 18 ships closing in and the platform still firing from behind, and the drone cloud still working. Through his secondary batteries, he made a decision. Tell them nothing, he said. He would not surrender to primitives. He would not add the eternal dominion to the history of wrath ships that had surrendered to a lesser civilization. That was not something that would happen. While he commanded this bridge, he turned to his engineering deck. Initiate self-destruct sequence, he said. Ordinalization. Zarvox Warlord. Primary command. A silence fell on the bridge. Then his engineering officer said, Ordinalization accepted, Warlord. Self-destruct sequence initiating. Detonation, and the ship shuddered, but the shudder was not from an enemy hit. It was from something clamping onto the hull. What was that? Zarvox said. Kravis spoke. Containment field deployment. Detected external origin, human technology. The field is another pause. This one longer than any pause the ship mind had made in the entire engagement. The field is physically preventing the self-destruct detonation sequence from propagating. It is containing the energy built up within acceptable limits before detonation can occur. Zarvox stared at the bridge ceiling. They had a containment field designed to prevent self-destruct detonations, which meant they had anticipated that he would try to self-destruct rather than surrender, which meant they had planned for that. 2. In Facility 7, Jaeyun Cho watched the containment field readout and let out a slow breath. Containment Array was her most recent project, barely 2 years old, based on energy capture technology that had taken her longer to develop than almost anything else she had built. The principle was simple. If you could build an absorbing field strong enough, you could catch an explosion before it had space to expand. In practice, it had been enormously difficult to achieve, and she had never been entirely sure it would work at full scale until this moment. It was working. She opened her comm channel to Park. Containment is holding. The eternal dominion is locked. Park's voice came back quiet and steady. Good work, Dr. Cho. She looked at the readout showing the state of the Wrath ship. 33% deflection capacity, multiple hull breaches, primary weapons severely degraded, no long-range communications, trapped in a containment field that would prevent it from detonating. She thought about what was on that ship. Technology data, records of 130 conquered civilizations, navigation charts, intelligence on Vreth, Dominion military infrastructure. She thought about how much information had just been delivered into humanity's hands. She thought about the 130 civilizations that had not had 60 years. To prepare, her expression was not triumphant, it was something quieter and more serious than triumph. It was the expression of someone who understands that winning a battle is not the same as winning a war, and that what comes next matters as much as what just happened. She turned back to her equipment and began preparing the next phase. Outside, in orbit, the Eternal Dominion sat, locked and helpless in a field of human energy, surrounded by ships that should not have existed, defeated by technology that the Vreth Dominion had never imagined could be turned against them. Zarvok sat in his command chair in the silence of a bridge that had stopped, receiving good news an hour ago, and for the first time in his career he had nothing left to do. Admiral Caleb Park opened the channel himself. He did not have a translator relay it. He spoke in Vreth, the Vreth language that Dr. Cho Jion had compiled from 60 years of intercepted Dominion communications, the language that had been part of Park's private study for the last 12 years. Learned in the early mornings before the rest of his staff arrived, practiced in the evenings, spoken to himself during long walks in the corridors of the command facility until he could form the sounds with something close to natural ease. He spoke it now over the short-range channel directly to the Eternal Dominion. Warlord Zarvox, he said, I am Admiral Kale Park, commander of Earth's Unified Defense Fleet. Your ship is contained, your weapons are offline, your self-destruct is suppressed, you have no remaining offensive or defensive capacity. I am offering you the opportunity to surrender, to order your crew to stand down and to be taken aboard one of our vessels as a prisoner of war. You and your crew will be treated according to our laws. You will not be harmed. He waited. The channel was open. He could hear the background sounds of the Eternal Dominion's bridge, the low hum of systems, the quiet voices of officers speaking to each other, the occasional tone of an alert. Then Zarvox's voice came through. The Vreth language had a particular quality when spoken by someone under stress. The consonants got harder, the spacing between words got tighter. Zarvox's voice had both of those qualities. You are a primitive species, Zarvox said. You live on one planet. You have existed in this galaxy for a fraction of the time that the Vreth Dominion has ruled it. You do not offer terms to a warlord of the Dominion. You do not. I am not offering terms, Park said. I am offering mercy. There is a difference. Terms are negotiated. Mercy is given. You are not in a position to negotiate. He paused. I will not make this offer. Again. Another silence. Then Zarvox said very quietly, the Dominion will send a fleet. It will take them time to understand what happened here. When they do, they will come in force, and what you have done today will not matter. Perhaps, Park said, but today you are here and they are not. Today this is your decision. I suggest you make it carefully. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, then a minute. Then Zarvox said, the Vreth Dominion does not surrender to primitives. Park closed his eyes for one moment, not out of frustration, out of something more like quiet sadness, the kind of soldier feels when a battle does not have to end the way it ends, but ends that way. Regardless, he opened his eyes. Understood, he said, and closed the channel. He turned to Min Jen, who stood beside him at the tactical display. Tell Jiayang to arm the array. Dr. Jiayang Cho had built the disintegration array over a period of 7 years. She had not wanted to build it. She had argued against it in the early planning sessions, when the question of Earth's final defensive option had first come up. She had said that the scale of the weapon was disproportionate, that the energy requirements were enormous, that it was the kind of weapon that should not exist unless it absolutely had to. Admiral Park had listened to her argument carefully. Then he had said, "You're right that it should not exist unless it has to, which is why I want you to build it so that if it has to exist, it exists and works, rather than not existing and leaving us without a final option." She had built it. Principle was an extension of the containment field technology, the same understanding of how energy fields interacted with matter, taken to its extreme conclusion. A containment field captured energy before it could expand. A disintegration array did the opposite. It introduced a cascade of precisely tuned energy frequencies into the molecular bonds of a target, disrupting those bonds at a fundamental level, converting matter into dispersed particles that could not be reassembled. It did not blow things up. It did not burn them or vaporize them. It took them apart at the atomic level and scattered the components so thoroughly that nothing coherent remained. Jiayang had tested it on small objects in her lab. She had tested it on a rock the size of her fist, and after the test she had looked at the space where the rock had been, and there had been nothing there, not even dust, because even the dust had been dispersed beyond the boundaries of what her instruments could detect. She had sat quietly for a while after that test. Then she had written up the results and filed them and continued working, because that was what she did. She stood at the array control station now and received the authorization code from Admiral Park. The code was correct. The system confirmed it. She began the activation sequence. The array was not a single weapon. It was distributed components placed in 12 of the orbital platforms, linked by a coordinated firing system that Jihan had designed to ensure that the energy cascade reached every part of the target simultaneously. The eternal dominion was nearly 4 km long, reaching every part of it at the same moment required careful geometry and precise timing. She had calibrated the geometry and timing many times. "System ready," she said on the command channel. Park's voice came back, "Fire when ready, G." Han. She looked at the display showing the Eternal Dominion locked in the containment field. She thought about the crew on that ship, the soldiers who had not chosen to come to Earth, who had been sent here by a high sovereign who treated civilizations as objects to be collected. She thought about the 130 civilizations that had been collected. She thought about the Solon Republic, the last one, the people who had sent their leaders in small ships to beg for mercy that had not been given. She pressed the activation key. The 12 platforms fired in a single coordinated burst that lasted 0.3 seconds. The Eternal Dominion did not explode. There was no dramatic fireball, no expanding cloud of debris, no shockwave. There was a brief, very intense pulse of light that the direct optical feed showed clearly, a pale blue-white flash that surrounded the shape of the ship, and then the light faded. The ship was gone. Not damaged, not destroyed in the conventional sense, gone. The space where a 4 km warship had been sitting 30 seconds ago was now simply empty space. The containment field had nothing left to contain. The mind clusters and the drone clouds. Found no remaining target, the orbital. Platforms adjusted their scans and confirmed what the optical feed had shown. There was nothing there. Ji Yan stood at her station for a long moment. Then she said into the command channel, "Target eliminated. No residual matter detected." She heard Park's quiet response, "Thank you, Ji Yan." She turned off her station display and sat down in her chair and did not say anything else. For a while, the search took 3 days, not because they expected to find the ship. They did not, but because a complete battle record required. Absence of debris, Earth sent collection drones through the entire engagement. Volume scanning at every frequency. Available, checking for any scrap of material large enough to identify as part of the Eternal Dominion. They found weapon discharge residue. They found particles from the platforms that had been destroyed in the early battle. They found traces of the drones. They found nothing from the Vreth ship, not a hull plate, not a power cell, not a structural component or a data core or a fragment of equipment, nothing. On the 4th day after the battle, Admiral Park sat in his office with the final search report in front of him and a cup of coffee that was for once still warm. He read through the report carefully. The language was technical and precise, and stripped of emotion the way official reports always were, and the conclusion was stated in a single sentence at the end: no recoverable material from the target vessel was identified within the search volume. He closed the report. He thought about what to do next. The answer had been in the planning documents for 20 years. He pulled up the prepared message file, reviewed it once, changed 3 words, and then sat for a while longer. The message needed to reach the Vreth Dominion. The Eternal Dominion had destroyed its long-range communications array before it was defeated, or rather before Ji Yan's targeting had destroyed it for them, so the ship itself could not be used to relay anything, but Earth had other options. The deep space monitoring arrays were designed for transmission as well as detection. 12 arrays positioned at the outer edges of the solar system, each one capable of broadcasting on Vreth communication frequencies. The message would reach Vreth space in approximately 48 hours. Park finalized the message and sent it to the broadcast station. Then he opened another document, one that was not addressed to the Vreth Dominion. The message to the Vreth Dominion was short. It was recorded in Warlord Arvax's own language in Park's careful Vreth, and it was also translated into 11 other galactic languages that Earth's communication analysts had compiled from 60 years of intercepted signals. Languages spoken by civilizations that the Vreth Dominion had conquered or threatened or was currently watching. The message said, "The warship Eternal Dominion entered Earth's solar system 97 hours ago and broadcast a demand for this planet's surrender. Earth did not surrender. A battle occurred. Earth's search teams have completed a thorough survey of the engagement volume. No wreckage from the Eternal Dominion was found, no debris, no material. The Eternal Dominion and its crew no longer exist in any form that can be recovered." It paused there and then continued. The Vreth Dominion believed that one ship was sufficient to conquer this world. They held this belief because they have defeated every civilization they have encountered without serious resistance. Earth has spent 60 years preparing to be the exception. We were aware of your Technology, we studied it, we improved. Upon it, we built our defenses in silence and waited, another pause. We have detailed technical data on Vreth. Warship design, we have combat performance data from this engagement. We have mapping data on Vreth. Communication frequencies. We have from the containment period some access to the Eternal Dominion's data architecture before it was eliminated, and we have been working through that data, and then at the end, Earth is not a primitive world. Earth was never a primitive world. We chose to appear that way. We will defend this planet against any force you choose to send. We will continue to improve. We will continue to prepare. You may choose to come again with more ships, with larger forces. That is your decision, but understand this clearly: the outcome will not change. It will only cost you more. The message ended. Park sent it. Then he turned to the other document, the one addressed not to the Vreth Dominion but to the other civilizations, the ones whose languages Earth had learned, the ones whose long-range communication frequencies Earth analysts had tracked over decades, the ones that had been absorbed or threatened or were living under the shadow of an empire that had never lost a battle. Until now, that message was different. It was shorter. It was not a warning, and it was not a threat. It was 3 sentences. The Vreth Dominion is not unbeatable. Earth defeated them today with technology built from 60 years of preparation and study. If your civilization survived, you have time. Use it. He sent that message to in the throne room of the Vreth Dominion. Central War Station, High Sovereign. Vreth now sat alone. He had received Kravis's final distress signal 16 hours before Earth's message arrived. The signal was fragmented and incomplete. A last-second transmission that had managed to punch through before the ship's communications array went offline. It contained battle data, partial sensor readings, a record of system failures. The data ended abruptly mid-transmission, and there had been nothing after it. 46 hours of silence, and then Earth's message. He had read it himself without his advisors present. He had told them to leave. He had sat in his throne room and read the message, and then remained sitting for a long time after he finished. 130 victories, he thought. About what the message meant, he thought. About the scout probe 6 months ago. One the analyst Voskra had suggested might have been shot down, he thought. About how he had dismissed that report. He thought about how the Dominion had looked at Earth for 60 years and seen nothing worth serious attention, and how Earth had used those 60 years to become something that should have been taken very seriously indeed. He thought about the message he had not yet replied to, and the message that had been sent to the other civilizations, the ones under Dominion control or Dominion threat, and what it would mean when those civilizations received it. He thought about the fact that Earth had said they had data from the Eternal Dominions architecture, the navigation charts alone, the routes, the coordinates, the locations of Dominion military installations and fleet staging points represented an intelligence breach of a scale that the Dominion had never experienced. He thought about a lot of things. He did not have easy answers for any of them. After a long time he stood and walked to the window of the throne room and looked out at space. The same space he had looked at his whole life, the space that had always been his empire's, the space through which 130 conquest ships had traveled. Without losing once, 130 victories won. Defeat, he had no frame for what to do. With that, his entire understanding of the Vreth Dominion's position in the galaxy was built on the premise that the Dominion did not lose, the civilizations that submitted did so 'cause they believed the Dominion could not be stopped. Civilizations that had briefly resisted had been destroyed quickly enough that the resistance never became a story other civilizations could point to. The Dominion's power was partly military, but it was equally built on the certainty, the unbroken, unquestioned certainty that fighting back was pointless. Earth had broken that certainty. One planet, one battle, one ship sent as an insult, not even wreckage. He stood at the window for a very long time, on the deck of the ESV, unyielding in low orbit above a blue and white planet. Commander Ha-Yun Song stood at the observation port and looked at the stars. The battle was over. Her ship was under repair, the port sections being sealed, the damaged batteries being replaced, the injured crew being cared for in the medical bay. Around her, the fleet was in similar condition. Every ship had taken damage. 2 ships had taken severe damage and were being assisted back to the lunar base. 3 crew members across the entire fleet had died. She had read their names twice. She would read them again tonight and again tomorrow and carry them the way she carried the names of everyone she had been responsible for who had not made it through. She thought about the Vreth crew. She thought about Zervok, who had been offered mercy and had refused it, and what that said about him, and about the empire that had made him. She did not feel triumphant about what had happened to them. She felt something more complicated, the weight of a serious thing done in a necessary moment, the kind of weight that did not lift quickly and probably should not. She thought about the 130 civilizations. She thought about the message Admiral Park had sent to them: you have time. Use it. She hoped they heard it. She hoped some of them were still capable of hearing it, that enough of them had survived in some form, even under Dominion rule, to find the signal and understand it. She hoped that somewhere, in some system she had never heard of, a scientist was sitting in a lab with a piece of technology that did not belong to their civilization and taking it apart carefully and asking the right questions. The stars were very bright. From up here, clear and distant and impossibly numerous, each one a sun. Most of them with worlds circling them. Some of those worlds with people on them, who were going about their days not knowing that the quiet empire that had ruled their corner of the galaxy for a long time had just encountered something it had never encountered before: a wall. A wall that had been built with patience and stubbornness and the particular human insistence on preparing for the worst possible outcome and then refusing to accept it even when it arrived at the door. Song stood at an observation port for a while longer, then she turned and walked back to her command station, because there was still work to do. Damage reports to review, resupply schedules to coordinate after action, analysis to write, the 1001 practical things that followed a battle and needed to be handled by the person in command. She sat down in her chair and pulled up her display. Outside the observation port, the stars continued to burn. Earth was still there, still standing still after everything, still standing, and somewhere in the distances between the stars a message was traveling at the speed of light through the dark, carrying 3 sentences to civilizations that had been told for a very long time that there was no point. In hoping you have time, use it.